super excited to dive right in. But as you all know, we love to start things off with a fun icebreaker as we let folks trickle in. So I'd love to know, with our speakers that we have here today, what are you most excited for this holiday season? As you can tell, I'm already leaning into the holiday season right now. So I'd love to know, Pete and Brian, what are you most excited for?
I'll go first. I think I'm pretty anal about these things. Shocking. Like I'm kind of like a process person. And so I have a whole like recurring list of stuff that we like to do in San Francisco for the holidays with my son, my 5-year-old. And so probably the big one there is I mean amongst the list, it's going ice skating in Union Square. He really likes that. So we're pretty juiced on that. Should be fun.
Nice. Is he a great ice skater?
Uh, he doesn't fall
Okay,
much.
that's good.
Yeah,
That's
we have
good.
the
Yeah,
little like
get the little,
penguin,
yeah,
the little penguin
start him
like
young.
yeah, like little penguin kind of like polar bear like sled things that they hold on to. It's pretty damn
Mhm.
cute.
Yeah, in Canada, we start the kids as early as 2. The next hockey players, as they
They
say.
were born with ice skates on. Isn't that how that works in
Yeah, they're born with. Brian,
what
how
about
about
you,
you?
Um, I mean, usually it's just seeing family, but I guess with the World Cup going on, I'm pretty happy to be watching all these World Cup games. So yeah,
Who are you
just
rooting
saw
for?
Spain get knocked out. I think I'm going with Argentina. I want Messi to win it. So
Me too.
yeah.
Agree.
Very
Hmm.
nice. Well, let's get started. Thank you for letting me know your holiday plans. And for those who are tuning in, let me know where you're calling in from. I love to know what city or state or country. And if you're also rooting for the World Cup, let us know who you're rooting for. Now, let's get started. We're here to talk about Level Up Reps 101 that drive revenue. But before we begin, I'm going to say a few words about Modern Sales Pros. So today's event is brought to you about the team. Oh, I hear a little bit feedback. Hello, hello, testing. Okay. So today's event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them to see around corners they might not know about. We do this through live sessions like the one you're at today, our online forum, and our quarterly summits, and we're starting to get back into in-person events. So if you're not already a part of MSP, you'll be invited to join after this event. And speaking of our summit, if you like this content, we're back with the next virtual Modern Sales Pros Revenue Excellence Summit. Join us for the Mega SKO January 24th to the 26th next month. We have over 20 plus events, 3,000 modern sales pros in attendance, and 50 plus high caliber speakers. You'll hear from leaders at Drift, Sales Loft, Lean Data, Stage 2 Capital, plus so much more. Don't miss out and sign up today. I'll actually drop the registration page in the chat. So definitely secure your spot and get your ticket.
Oh my gosh, I've been like seeing the speakers that have been being signed up. It's bananas. Super
It's
rad.
going to be awesome. And Pete, I'm going to pass it off to you. Atrium is our sponsor today. So if you want to say a few words about Atrium, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Angelica. I appreciate it. Here, let me share my screen here. And yeah, so I'm super pumped because we're going to be talking about one-on-ones today. I got my colleague Brian here. It'll be super fun. But for folks who might not be familiar with Atrium, we make data-driven sales management software. And so it's software that helps AE, SDR, and CS managers use data and metrics to improve team performance. And so what Atrium does is it continually monitors dozens and dozens of AE and SDR KPIs and then proactively alerts you to when something is off with your reps, your teams, and so on. And so what this means is that managers can get to coaching insights faster about their reps and drive positive behavior change and win, because like that's like what we're all here to do, right? And so one of the great things about this is that it only takes about 2 minutes to set up through a read-only connection to your Salesforce account. So that's a little bit on Atrium. So please, for folks who haven't joined one of these before, please do use the Q&A panel. And it's being recorded and will be made available after the event. So a little bit of intros here. I can go first. Pete Kazanjy, I'm one of the founders of Atrium. I lead our go-to-market efforts here as well. Atrium is my second SaaS startup. My first one was a company called TalentBin that I started in 2010. It was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And that's really kind of where I got, cut my teeth with respect to modern sales, kind of like modern, operationally excellent, analytically centric sales. So it went from being our first business generalist founder to our first seller, sales manager, sales leader. Was subsequently acquired by Monster Worldwide, where I was responsible for new product sales over there. After I left Monster, I wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and then started this little thing called Modern Sales Pro. So that's a little bit on me. Brian, maybe you can share with folks a little bit about what you spend your time doing here with our customers at Atrium, and then your kind of prior sales role, so people can kind of understand the sales motions that you have familiarity with.
Yep. I have a little bit shorter of a background than Pete when it comes to SaaS sales, but I started at a company called Lever, which is a HR, helps companies with the hiring process.
Yep.
And I've been at Atrium for almost 3 years now, like 2.5 years. And I really help other companies kind of get to that data-driven sales management and like get a foundation of like, hey, these are metrics that we need for our sales team to grow. Been here for about 2.5 years, and work with companies, big companies, smaller companies, and really enjoying kind of like the journey that we have here.
Nice. Well, I'm so glad to have you here joining us today, because I'm sure that you end up talking with a lot of our customers about how to bring data into the one-on-ones that they do with their SDRs, their AEs, et cetera. Before we kind of get jamming here, wanted to offer folks a couple of resources that are some of my favorite sales management resources. So Qualified Sales Leaders, absolutely fantastic book, super fun sales leadership book. Cracking the Sales Management Code is kind of like the Bible of data-driven sales management. And then, of course, Corey Bray's 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach. All of these are really fantastic books. If you'd like to get copies of those, along with a Atrium Coffees for Closers Yeti, we're going to go ahead and drop a hyperlink here into the chat for people to sign up for that. All we ask for in exchange is a quick chat with one of our quick discovery chat with one of our account executives. So let's talk about one-on-ones and why they're so important. So one of the things that organizations don't appreciate as much as they really should is that it's really the frontline manager who's the key difference between lower performing organizations and high performing organizations. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because those frontline managers are the ones who are, ideally driving better behavior, better performance, that they're coaching people up, they're identifying shortfalls, et cetera. And so when you have organizations that do a better job of investing in their frontline managers and making them more successful, all sorts of great stuff comes out of it. You get higher rep productivity, reps are more likely to be top performers, you retain your reps better, you get higher effort, et cetera. The challenge is that, being doing the things that a frontline manager is responsible for is not the easiest thing in the world. And ends up being like a handful of different things that folks ought to be doing, and not everyone's doing all those things. Right. So yes, deal inspection and strategy is an important part of being a sales manager, but it's not the only thing. Some managers treat it like it's the only thing, which is kind of like a problem there. But there's actually a bunch of other stuff that you should be doing as well. You should be tracking progress towards goals, not just from an output standpoint, but also from an input and intermediary standpoint. You should be bringing data into your one-on-ones. You should be monitoring the ramp of new hires as well. You should be identifying issues and fixing them in your reps, because that's the way that we make people better, is not by closing deals for them and not by just saying, hey, keep on keeping on, but instead saying, hey, you have this hitch in your sales motion right here. You've got this thing right here that if we did it a little bit better, we can drive better performance. Like that's your job as a manager. And then kind of the inverse there of looking at what your top performers are doing and then standardizing that around to the rest of your team. And so probably the place where all of these behaviors ought to be done, like the place where that should happen, is the one-on-one, right? So one-on-ones are the most powerful tool for managing your team. And so the reason why it's super important for folks to be having those is because it allows you to do a bunch of so that space on the calendar allows you to do a bunch of different things, like build relationship and trust with your reps, coach and develop your staff. Right? So there's the space on the calendar to do that, to provide ongoing feedback for making things better, to get ahead of bigger issues, to drive accountability, et cetera, et cetera. Brian, when you've been working with your various customers, and you open their eyes to the fact that one-on-one shouldn't be focused purely on deal inspection or what have you, how does that impact how they're able to manage?
Well, I think at first they're a little scared because they're like, well, I've come from a background of being a sales manager or a sales rep. So like they're really focused on the deals. And they're looking at Salesforce. They're like, I have these dashboards that I'm looking at, and they're having to kind of make gut feel decisions when it's coming to like using metrics.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a little new for a lot of like managers. So it's a little scary for some of them.
Little trepidation there, right? Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the challenges is that I think you really nailed it, is like a lot of managers, especially AE managers, come from being sellers themselves. And so they're kind of used to the thing. They're used to this thing. They're used to doing deal inspection with their own deals. And so when all you've got is a hammer, everything kind of looks like a nail. And so I think that's a great observation. And so one of the things that we would say is like, hey, that's cool, but like the thing that made you a successful rep is not the thing that's going to make you a successful manager. And so making sure that you're like glowing your behavior up to be in alignment with your new responsibilities is really important there. So one of the things that we kind of talk about here at Atrium is we have a joke about calendar is destiny. And so making sure that that you have recurring one-on-ones on the calendar, it ends up being a really important thing there. Moreover, what you want to make sure that you're doing is that there's good content in that meeting as well, because if you don't have good content in that meeting, invariably what will happen is people will they'll just fail back to this on a recurring basis. They're like, oh, let's talk about deals versus like, hey, here's the specific initiative that we're talking about with respect to you. And so you can do it. There's a variety of ways by which to do that. One pretty basic way is just to have a Google document, right? Just have a Google document where you have a recurring line items in there. I think we actually have a template here that we can drop into the chat. But the important thing is just make sure that they're calendared on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis, like every other week, so, up to you. Importantly, you don't want to skip them, but you do want to make sure that you have topics on the calendar there that are in the agenda that are going to be impactful. Brian, what are some of the ways that you've seen organizations successfully make sure that they're tackling rep-centric topics in these one-on-ones?
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of two things. I see a lot of companies that kind of have the pipe review and then also the one-on-one are broken up into two different meetings where it's like, hey, in the one-on-one, we're going to look at conversion rates. We're going to look at new op inflow. We're going to look at, where within your sales cycle can improve. Yeah, exactly. And then within the other one, then the pipe review when they're actually looking at deal inspection. So they're breaking it up into two. It's not like, oh, let's spend 15 minutes here and 15 minutes here, because it usually ends up being 30 minutes of just deal inspection.
That's right. It's like, one of my favorite pieces of fortune cookie wisdom is like, the man who knows his limitations has none, where you're kind of like, look, man, we know that if we just spend all of our, if I don't separate this into two different meetings, we're going to spend the entirety of this meeting talking about deals, right? So the other thing that ends up being really important in one-on-ones is bringing data and metrics into those one-on-ones. And so the reason why that's really super important is because realistically, the only way of the using data is the way to get leverage on your management, right? And so we're going to kind of use some examples here as to why that's not the case, or like why not using data is problematic. So as an example, as a manager, say you have 6 reps or 8 reps or what have you, riding along on calls is low leverage, right? It's good in part, but only doing that is going to be very low leverage. Like, are you on the right call? Like, are you on the right call at the right point in the funnel for that given rep, et cetera. When you have remote staff, it really negatively impacts your ability to do what we call organic instrumentation. So like, are reps busy? What do they sound like? Are they having the right number of customer facing meetings? Are they on top of their ops, et cetera? That's all very, very difficult to do when you have a distributed organization. Same with kind of like low leverage of riding along on calls. Closing deals for your reps, of course, is extraordinarily low leverage because there's only one of you. And of course, like, even though riding along on calls is low leverage, and listening to calls, even if you're at like 1.5x, that's a little bit better, and you can kind of time shift things, but it's still a lot of time. And of course, as we were just discussing earlier, like, recurring deal inspection is really highly problematic because it only kind of gives you deal by deal snapshotting, and it relies on you to form larger patterns of like where there might be issues, as compared to when you use data, you can literally say like, oh, this rep right here has a conversion rate issue out of proposal or out of discovery across all of their deals, right? So you can literally see that in the data and in the metrics, versus having to derive that from like, oh, I'm getting a spidey sense that things are falling out of the pipe at proposal, right? And so these are some of the reasons why it's so important to use data in those one-on-ones and in your management. So we're going to talk a little bit about like what that looks like in those one-on-ones. Importantly, what you want to do is what we like to refer to as like the OODA loop here, where you want to observe, orient, decide, and act. And actually, this kind of comes from this it's actually this modern air-to-air warfare doctrine theorist, John Boyd, who coined this concept. But the idea here is essentially what you're doing is you're observing what's happening, right? Whether you're using your eyes, or in the case of sales management, you're ideally using metrics. You're observing what is happening. You're making sense of that by orientating and saying like, oh, okay, I think I see what's going on there. That this rep seems to have a untouched opportunity problem, right? I see this information by this metrics. Okay, I'm going to decide that like that's the thing that we're going to tackle right now, and then we're going to take an action on that, where we're going to calendar 30 minutes twice a week for this on this rep's calendar for them to do pipeline management. And then importantly, what we're going to do is we're going to loop back again in a week or in 2 weeks and say, hey, did our pipeline hygiene get better? Has those number of untouched opportunities gone down? By then observing again. And then you just continue to do that loop. So either in that situation, great, their untouched opportunities have gone down. That's wonderful. They now have a clean pipe. Uh-oh, maybe they're a little bit light on ops right now. Great, let's refill them. You're going to do some more prospecting over the course of the next couple of weeks. Wonderful, right? And you just kind of like loop. Or alternatively, oh man, your untouched opportunity counts didn't go down. Uh-oh, maybe it's a different issue. Let's figure out what the deal is there and how we're gonna tackle that. But essentially, it's this observe, orient, decide, and act loop that's going to allow us to do better management. And so you can kind of see what that looks like here in sales, where in a no data scenario and a no metrics scenario, it's more like, oh, you're not seeing things, you're getting surprised by things. When you do want to inspect things, it's more like, I guess I can like ask some questions here. I can't really come with like hypotheses. When you go to decide before you act, oftentimes managers and leaders will really second guess themselves because like they don't want to be the asshole. And be like, okay, well, I don't have data to support this, and like I have a hunch, but I don't want to be like, I don't want to be the ogre here. And so all that kind of comes down to people like not acting, which of course is like not ideal, right? Like we want people to be acting and improving behavior. And so with data, it's far better, right? You can see something, you see around corners, you can see something that's like maybe weird over here. You don't have to necessarily jump to conclusion there. You can inspect a little bit more and orient more, like, okay, I want to dig into the data. Like, this rep has a high number of untouched opportunities. Okay, is that because they're overloaded with respect to the number of ops they have? Oh, well, like, let's go look at how many ops they have in their pipe. Oh no, they have the same number of ops as everybody else. They're not overloaded. Okay, well, like, is this just like an activity issue here? Let's go ahead and look at how many op touches they've had in the trailing 30 days. Oh, that is the problem. It looks like their untouched ops is coming from an activity problem. That's weird. Let's go ahead and look at how busy they are from a calendar standpoint. Oh man, like their calendar is overrun with internal meetings, right? Like I'm seeing that they have a ton of meetings. Wonderful. That's the thing that's wrong. Let's go ahead and do X, Y, Z to fix it, right? So like that's the behavior that we want as compared to this over here. Brian, when you think about like bringing data into management cadences and kind of like this OODA loop in sales management, what kind of pops to mind there in terms of some of the positive impacts you've seen across your customers?
Well, I think I have two. I actually had one last week. I was talking to a frontline manager who was looking over 12 reps, and they were like, "Look,
what?
I have a dashboard."
A frontline manager over 12 reps? That's bananas.
Yeah, and they're like, "I have a dashboard. I have this rep that is doing really well from activity standpoint. Everything looks good. They're progressing ops, but like something's happening at the end of the funnel." So we went to our homepage. We went to the reps homepage. We saw that they had a low follow-up meeting ratio compared to everyone else on the team, like 0.3. Like they weren't getting it. Like their follow-up meeting ratio was just very, very poor.
Not
so we looked at that, and then we looked at they're not getting second or third meetings. Yeah. So we looked at all their opportunities, their down funnel opportunities, and none of them had a next meeting on the calendar, which was leading to Atrium saying, hey, like that time and stage was also getting longer than everyone else. So it's really easy for them to dissect and be like, okay, I need to this rep here. She was an SMB rep, like newer rep, and we were like, hey, we need her to make sure she's getting next steps on the calendar. I had that meeting with him yesterday, and of the 10 opportunities, 8 had a next meeting on the calendar. So it was great to see.
Look at that. That's awesome,
yeah,
right?
He took it, gave it to her, and like, yeah. So, yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, that's super. I mean, like, and that is what we as managers are supposed to be doing, right? Like that's how we drive better performance. And I think the thing that you described right there is like a super common thing with more junior reps is like, getting off a call, being like super, doing a happy dance or whatever, and like not realizing, oh man, like I don't have another meeting on the calendar, right? And so the only way that you catch these recurring things is you gotta have the eyes in order to do that. And of course that's metrics. And so just by way of like a little bit of a plug here for how we think people should be going about this. One of the big problems that we observe in our customers and our prospects is that most organizations don't do their managers a lot of favors when it comes to helping them manage by data, in their one-on-ones or otherwise. There's kind of two main reasons why that's the case. One is what like the tooling that they give managers in order to do this really isn't for managers, right? It's more traditional analytics, like for analysts, analytical tooling that we kind of call like walls of charts. And of course, we all kind of can recognize that like this is not the most usable thing for people to do. And so what ends up happening is they end up kind of not consuming it. And then the second thing too is that manager enablement ends up like not really being something that organizations invest in as heavily. A lot of enablement resources go to the reps themselves. And managers are kind of like left to kind of fend for themselves there. And so this, from our point of view, this is an untenable situation here. And so what our claim to the market would be is that managers first line manager is extraordinarily important. And so because it's an extraordinarily important role, they should be empowered to manage using data with software that's purpose made for that use case. And so what that looks like with Atrium is it's every KPI for those reps and those teams, SDRs, AE, KPIs. But then it's not just that, like ready to go out of the box, but more importantly, it's all those KPIs need to be monitored, right? Because like that's the big thing, using your eyeballs to kind of like bird dog this stuff right here. It's not really like, it's not the move. And instead, what you can do is you can have that being statistically monitored and letting you know like how people are tracking towards their goals, if they're hitting them or not, where people are having issues via early warning alerting. So you can jump on those things, kind of like what Brian was saying earlier, and then helping you understand like what the actual root cause of a potential problem might be. Like, hey, this rep right here has a bookings issue. The reason why he has a bookings issue is because it's not because his opportunity ownership is low. It's not because his average selling price is low. It seems to be that his win rate is problematic. And then moreover, it's his win rate out of like proposal, right? His conversion rate out of proposal is much worse than everybody else's. Like, let's fix that right there. That's the sort of thing that our managers should be spending their time doing versus, pretending to stare at walls of charts. And so what our positioning is we exist to help sales managers, AE, SDR managers use data to improve team performance. And this drives like tons of positive outcomes. So, we work with companies like Gainsight that resurrected more than $3 million in stock opportunities. We work with a fantastic organization called Envoy that 1.5x their meeting volumes on their AE team and reduce their neglected opportunities, improve their pipe hygiene by more than 40%. We work with organizations in order to raise their AE prospecting levels as well, right, by more than 50%. And then we work with SDR organizations as well in order to in the case of Pendo, more than double the pipeline generation on a per SDR basis. And so in short, we work with approaching 300 modern sales organizations to help them manage with data. So that's a little bit on Atrium. We can kind of talk a little bit more about how to systematize using OODA loops in your one-on-one here. So how do we systematize this observation piece, the kind of like first O in the OODA loop there? So first, how do we have those assets in hand? Well, there's a couple of different ways to do that. You can do CRM reporting. Problem with that is that you got to actually make it, right? Like it's available for you there, but like the nice thing about it is you can make anything you want with it. The downside associated with it is like somebody's got to make it, right? Somebody's got to build the reporting, build the dashboarding, and what have you. And then moreover, once it's actually built, someone's got to actually like look at it. Business intelligence is another example of this, kind of a more involved version of like CRM reporting. Again, really flexible and powerful, but someone's got to build it. Someone's got to make the assets, and then moreover, someone's actually has to consume those. Our favorite version, of course, is what we call data-driven sales management software, which is super quick to set up. Maybe a little bit less flexible than these guys because it's pre-baked and the KPIs are already ready to go. But the trade-off there is that it's automatically monitored in order for to let managers know what's happening there. So that's the first thing, is like having the assets. The next thing is, okay, great. How do you make sure that you systematize the observation and have time on the calendar? Well, like you got to have the space to make sure that observation happens here. These are some examples of like what an operating rhythm might look like there. Pipeline review, deal strategy meetings, one-on-one meetings, QBRs, et cetera. And what you'll note is that these operating rhythm meetings have different frequencies, right? So like a pipeline review might be weekly. That might be like a communal pipe review. That might be just like focus on close dates and stages and what have you. Deal strategy as distinct from a one-on-one might be as frequently as weekly, where you're reviewing the top deals there and like actually making space to talk about how to contend with those deals and progress them. This would be different than a one-on-one, where in the one-on-one what we're focusing in on is reviewing metrics and our coaching initiatives, HR topics, and things like that. Importantly, separating these things out ends up being really powerful, because that way you have space on the calendar for both and they don't bleed into each other there. So then the next thing is, okay, well, if we're doing a good job of making sure that we have the assets for observation and then the time on the calendar for observation, okay, like how are we systematizing the orientation and the decision? So like the consumption of that. And so the way to kind of think about what that ought to look like is like, you want to detect when something seems off or kind of weird. You then want to be able to diagnose what might be the root cause of that thing, and then communicate that to the rep in order to drive remediation of it, right? Like, so this is kind of like a 3-step process there. Okay, well, so how do you get good at detecting potential issues? Well, you kind of just like want to look for outliers there, right? And so what that might look like in practice might be like, in a given bar chart scenario, you're going to look for things that are like much higher than other things, or you want to look for things that are a little bit like lower. And the important thing there is like looking at that on an appropriate sampling interval, if you will, right? So like, if you're looking at customer facing meetings, you probably don't want to look at it like, oh, this week, right? For like account executives, it might be like trailing 30 days, like what's happening with our reps. Similarly, looking at trends to see if there's any kind of movement in that regard is powerful as well, because if you're only looking at totals and like a trailing 30-day or trailing 90-day period, that if there's a recent deterioration, it might take a while for that issue to manifest in the total. So looking at trends can be really helpful as well. So you can kind of catch, like in this case, the orange line right here, you can kind of see this rep deteriorating over time and see what's happening there. Brian, what are some of the recommendations you might have around how people can better like interpret and detect issues to kind of get ahead of things with respect to their reps?
Yeah, I was actually talking to one of the frontline managers at SalesLoft 2 weeks ago. We were talking about how he has his reps submit calls. They were submitting calls of like they wanted to listen to, which he was like, yeah, it's great. Like they do really well, but it wasn't descriptive enough of knowing, hey, like which call should they be listening to? So what we did is we looked at their conversion rates, and we set up an alert feed of like, hey, I want to know every time a rep has a dip in a conversion rate, and that's a call that he wants them to submit. So the way he kind of stays in front of it is he just has like once a week an alert feed that goes out saying, hey, this rep has a dip in this conversion rate from this stage to this stage. So he says that the rep needs to submit a call from that. So he has a goal on it, on the conversion rates, that it needs to be a certain number, but then also the alert feed that shows up and says, hey, these are calls that you need to submit for this week or the last 2 weeks. So alert feeding.
Yep, I love it. Right. So essentially it's just like, hey, I know that I have this issue right here. I know that I'm going to put an asset around it and make sure I'm able to kind of catch that as things are, either doing better or alternatively not doing better. Yeah. And this is actually one of the reasons why when we work with our customers, it's not just about reports and dashboards. It's also about like statistical monitoring of these things, such that you can have something else that's not your eyeballs catching these potential issues. Like, hey, this rep right here has 40% fewer new opportunities coming into their pipe than usual. That's something that we should be concerned about, right? Like, look out, let's get ahead of that, because we don't want to get tripped up and caught flat-footed later on. The other thing so there's detecting, and then there's like root causing and kind of figuring out, okay, what is the underlying issue that we might want to address here? And so we actually have, I'm not at my desk right now, but we have these handy dandy metrics inspection laminates. They actually look like the thing that's on the screen right now without the orange highlights here. But what it does is it unpacks how these various KPIs are related to each other, right? And so when you're trying to figure out a potential issue associated with a lagging indicator like bookings, what you can do is you can kind of quote unquote go right. So if somebody has an issue with their bookings, okay, where is that coming from? Is it because their average selling price is low? Is it because their count of wins is low? Well, if it's because their count of wins is low, well, where is that coming from? Is that because they don't have enough opportunities? Or is it because their win rate isn't where it needs to be? Right? Oh, okay. It's actually they have plenty of opportunities. It's because their win rate isn't where it needs to be. Okay. Well, in that scenario, let's like look downstream from that and say, where is that deriving from? Is it an opportunity conversion rate issue? Where in the pipeline is that opportunity conversion rate happening? Is it a pipeline hygiene issue? Right, with the number of untouched ops isn't where it needs to be, et cetera. And you can, of course, do this on a recurring basis. It like actually might not have been a wins thing. It might be an average selling price thing. And then upstream of average selling price, that might be the fact that the rep's average opportunity size might not be where it needs to be, et cetera. And so essentially what you want to do is kind of go right. Brian, as someone who's like been here at Atrium for a second, obviously you've gotten way better at kind of doing this diagnosis, but where do you what are some of your recommendations that you provide to AE managers and SDR managers around how they can get better at kind of this root causing behavior?
Well, the first thing we kind of look at is like, okay, what is their overall bookings target they need? And then kind of look at the time and stage, close won deals, and time and stage for close won deals, new op inflow, and their average selling price. And we want to make sure that like using this formula that they actually have those targets on like a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis, so the managers know exactly these are the benchmarks that and the footprint that they need to actually hit those quarterly targets and those numbers. So it's actually one of the first things we do, like when we set up a free account.
Nice. Right. So and so then there's like a fingerprint of success on how to on like what to actually tackle there.
It basically gives a foundation of like, this is what it should look like. And then we can diagnose easily from there which reps are below that or which reps are above that and why. Like, go back to like untouched ops and kind of doing that, going down that formula.
Got it. Right. So it's just like, hey man, like here's our expectation here. Great. And here's where like you're falling short or alternatively not. Great. So that was kind of like us covering orientation, right? But and kind of like decisioning, which kind of takes us to this. But now the important thing is like we really need to be able to loop back around and tackle and make sure that we're observing again, right? And so make sure that we're looping back. And I think the big thing there is really make a plan, stick to it, audit it. And so that kind of goes back to making sure that those one-on-ones are present on the calendar, that you are documenting the things that are being worked on, and then the agreed next action, right? Like, hey, you know what? These are the topics that we want to cover. Hey, I want to talk about the round robin, or I'm a rep. I want to talk about the round robin and how I feel that maybe I'm like, not getting the lead inflow that I would anticipate. The manager topic might be prospecting activity, right? Because we want to make sure that you're actually prospecting at the levels that we anticipate you doing. Current coaching, and this might be like an org-wide initiative. Our current coaching area of emphasis might be pipeline hygiene, as being measured by untouched opportunity counts. And then we're going to create an explicit next action that comes out of this, right? So say, hey, you know what? We're going to calendar 2 1-hour blocks per week for pipe management. We're going to put that on your calendar such that those can't be covered over by a customer facing meeting or what have you. Oh, and what you should do is you should BCC me on your outbound touches on those pipeline management, or like as you're managing those pipe. Like, this is an agreed next set of actions that are going to happen. And then we know that in 2 weeks, when we have this meeting again, we're going to talk about these specific items right here. We're going to talk, like, there's no hiding. We know what we're going to talk about, and that's going to drive accountability all throughout the week on the way to that next meeting. Right. And then the last thing I want to kind of touch on here is kind of coaching and development, right? Because the one-on-one, like the one-on-one is a great place where we identify these issues and talk about them, but it's also the place where we can coach and develop the behaviors that we want in order to fix those issues here. And so just like we can cover a little bit here of what kind of like coaching versus not might look like there. So some of these things you might kind of like identify from like more problematic managerial behavior, like, hey, when's the Lockheed deal coming in? Where a better coaching behavior there might be like, hey, like what's concerning you about the Lockheed deal? I'm noticing that it seems that you're only engaged with 2 contacts within that account. Typically a deal that size, we might be engaged with more like 5 people. What do we need to do in order to make it such that we're more in line with those expectations? That would be more of a more productive coaching conversation. A less productive coaching conversation might be, can you make this forecast bigger? A more productive one might be, hey, I've noticed that your forecast is pacing behind a little bit. Are there ideas on things that we can potentially pull forward and maybe prepone some of those, some deals that might otherwise be out in further months or in further quarters? Or alternatively, if we're in a situation where we can't really avoid it or we can't fix it right now, is there something that we can do now to avoid this situation in the future? Brian, when you think of some of the more productive kind of like coaching conversations, maybe that you've either had here or that you've seen in kind of your customers, where would what kind of pops to mind there?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I've definitely had the manager that's this is what I say my forecast is, and they're like, well, I'm going to put you down for $10,000 more. I'm just like, but I just said that's not there. They're like, but you can do it. I'm thinking like the more coaching ones. Looking at kind of like definitely the first one, like, hey, we're looking at this deal, like let's look at this and try to understand where there could be some pockets that maybe you're feeling that there could be maybe that the deal might not be progressing as well as you want it to be, and trying to understand like where those pockets might be. And then the more activity one as well, like actually making sure that like, hey, we're not just sending emails to send emails, like let's make them quality touch points and make sure that they're actually there's a reason that we're reaching out. And then doing the CCing the manager or the BCCing has been super helpful. We've done that, especially when I was ramping with you, and you would say like, hey, we could have changed this a little more. We can make this screenshot bigger, and making sure that I understand like what it should look like. So the CCing of emails was super helpful too.
Yeah, that is, it's funny. I think a lot of the times, especially like new managers are oftentimes afraid of like micromanagement, like CCing me on CCing your manager or BCCing your manager on all of your outbound communication. Like, oh man, like what, do you not trust that I'm doing it? It's like, no, what I'm going to be able to do is catch the fact that like you're formatting your emails in a way that is like not the most productive way in the world, or like, oh, your call to action is hidden way down here, right? Oh man, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, totally. Let's just like put it up at the top here so you can your prospect can see exactly what it is that you needed them to do, and then you can put the supporting material down there. Oh wow, that's super awesome. Yeah.
The other side of that too is you can give shout outs to the other side of that too is like you sometimes send shout outs like, hey, look how well Shane sent this email, or look at this like structure of this email, and you can give shout outs to the rest of the send it out to the team, which is pretty great.
Yeah, exactly. It's like highlights, right? It's like Sports Center top 10, right? And it's like taking the success of folks and then standardizing it around to other folks. Like that's the mechanism by which that's facilitated there. Cool. So like we're just going to give a little example of a kind of a coaching example here of like what data-driven sales management and coaching looks like in practice. This is from like a real live customer of Atrium's. So essentially what happened here was an organization identified that one of their reps had a lighter conversion rates at both the top and the bottom of the funnel as compared to their peers. And so what you can see here is this is a opportunity conversion rate card out of Atrium This is the percentage of on the y-axis here. This is the percentage of opportunities that converted out of that stage, right? So these are the different stages down here. And so, what you can see here is that this rep in orange, as compared to the team average here in blue, had a little bit lighter of a conversion rate out of their meeting pending here, but certainly they had a big problem with conversion rate out of proposal and conversion rate out of contract sent here. And so great, we observe that, we see that that's an issue, we can go ahead and we can tackle that. And so importantly, what happened here was the manager worked with the rep on improving their behavior, both at the top of the funnel, so converting out of discovery here. So this is a different visualization of that conversion rate, where the conversion rate is still here on the y-axis. The x-axis now is over time, right? Because it's only conversion rate out of this discovery stage right here. And so what you can see is that this rep had a lighter conversion rate out of discovery, and it really declined right here. And then it popped back up again here after they were coached up on that topic, and able to really work on progressing things out of that discovery state. The same was true down funnel. And so by being more effective at the top of the funnel, the rep in question gave themselves more quote unquote at bats, where instead of, because the opportunities weren't converting out of discovery and getting into trial, now because they were getting out of discovery and into trial, you can see the number of, this is a different metric here, this is the number of stages that reached a given stage, or sorry, the number of opportunities that reached a given stage. In this case, it was a pilot. And so you can see that this rep was kind of like bouncing along here, kind of like in the doldrums. And then once he changed his behavior, boom, it jumped up to a much, much higher number of pilots being turned on a monthly basis here, which is really impactful. And then similarly, what you can see is a substantial change in this rep's win rate from proposal, from the stage, the one that previously had been problematic. So through better coaching there on improving some late stage behaviors, you can see the conversion rate went from fairly low here to much, 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 much higher. And so in short, what happened was this rep went from this pattern, right, with like this problematic conversion rate, this problematic conversion rate, and this problematic conversion rate here, to this pattern right here, where they were at above or better than, or like at or better than the relevant conversion rates as compared to the rest of their peers, and substantially changed their performance, all through better data-driven coaching facilitated in one-on-ones. And so what came out of this was far more pipeline moving down funnel. So you can kind of see that this rep had a little bit like a leaky pipeline situation. And then once he started driving more and more and more of those pilots through that better behavior, you can see that his pipeline built and built and built and built. And moreover, his down funnel pipe built much more substantially, which is exactly what you want to see, right? So like in this case, lo and behold, when things stop falling out of the funnel at the top of the funnel and then falling out down funnel, this is exactly what you're going to see here. And it's eventually going to turn into bookings for you there. Brian, have you seen other, data-driven coaching, performance remediations that kind of like popped to mind maybe recently with some of your customers?
Yeah, but for this exact example, actually, it's funny. I remember this sales cycle, and the funny thing is that the manager, he didn't know about any of this whole process until he got this sound like Atrium plug, but he didn't know about this until he got the Atrium account set up, and Atrium was saying, hey, this rep's conversion rate from these two stages is struggling compared to everyone else, which he wouldn't have caught. And it was just great to see like how quickly he was able to remediate it while seeing it, like being like, this is an area of coaching, which he, with Salesforce dashboard, it's very hard to do, but with the alerting that came with it, it was just like, focus on these two areas for this manager. Which was cool.
Yeah. I think that's the thing, is that oftentimes, I mean, you and I see this a lot, right? Is that like, oftentimes the people who are charged with supporting the organization from a analytics standpoint, like are very analytical themselves. So oftentimes this is like sales operations, revenue operations, or what have you. And oftentimes like they want to be a little bit like more in the weeds than is almost needed, because a lot of the times it's just like very basic things, right? It's like, hey, look, like we just need our AEs to do more prospecting behavior, right? It's not like we're not curing cancer here. It's just like you need to be doing more prospecting behavior. Or, hey guys, like you really need to make sure that you're having good like making sure that you're having lots and lots of second meetings. Let's focus in on that and just like make sure that we're having more meetings with our customers. And like lo and behold, the output from that is, you know, more customer facing meetings, which drives more bookings behavior. And so oftentimes it's like, it's not that something's like complicated and confusing. It's more just like having the visibility of like, oh man, you have a terrible pipeline hygiene problem. Gosh, it's super obvious now that I have this visibility into this. It's not like, you know, I had to debug a bunch of things or like, you know, magically diagnose what was going on. It's like, man, your pipeline, you have way more ops than everyone else. And like, my goodness, you're not touching any of them. Jeez Louise, that's like pretty obvious. Let's fix that. And every sales team has lots of low hanging fruit like that, whether it's level of effort, or especially nowadays when people are really focused on driving more efficiency out of their reps, whether it's like lax level of effort or very, very obvious areas of like efficiency improvement around better pipe hygiene, better conversion, all those sort of things. So wonderful. Well, Brian, any kind of like parting shots that you might share with our audience here before we wrap up?
Not really. I mean, it's just great working with frontline managers to help them get to this level of like, hey, I can no longer go with gut feel and focusing on like just the deals, and seeing the switch that they're making to being more data driven is great. So I appreciate everyone. Let me come on, and Pete, you let me come on and kind of just do some color commentary here.
Yeah, it's super fun. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Is I think we see that a lot with a lot of our customers is they're going from, especially like folks who are going from being an SDR to being a SDR manager, going from being an AE to being an AE manager, or even like folks who have kind of been around the block a little bit longer, but have never really kind of like embraced that data-driven like muscle, really realizing that that's like an important required capability in as a manager. Like it's table stakes nowadays, right? And of course, we do our master class on Moneyball for sales management and what have you. But it's kind of a similar situation where, you know, 15 years ago, like baseball organizations didn't use analytics in order to whether to recruit, let alone to do like shifts and things like that. And then it kind of made its way into other parts of the professional athletics world. Like, you know, Brian has a background in professional soccer and so on and so forth. But like anytime something is a source of advantage, right? Like anytime that there's like a tool at your disposal and a behavior at your disposal that can help you be better and drive better performance, people need to adopt it, or like the world's going to pass them by. And I think we're really starting to see that in sales land, where sales managers and leaders are starting to realize that like if you're not using data in your sales management motion, and you're not bringing it into your one-on-ones, and you're not you're not managing by metric in that regard, you're probably like not going to be in your role for a long time, because that's a super required capability. Like you could imagine, like there are no NBA teams or Major League Baseball teams that don't have meaningful analytics investments now, where like managers and coaches aren't using data on a day-to-day basis. And I think the same thing is happening here in sales land. You know, slowly but surely there. Oh, hi, Angelica, you're back.
I'm back. Thank you, Pete and Brian, for today's session. I'm here to wrap things up. I actually put your Moneyball Masterclass in the chat as well. So for the audience members, be sure to bookmark that and check it out. As well, definitely, I check out the goodies for free here that Atrium is providing. I dropped the link. Be sure to get your goodies and Yeti. And I want to say thank you to our sponsor for today's event, Atrium, and thank you everyone for attending today's event. Just a reminder that the recording and key takeaways along with Pete's presentation will be made available on the MSP website before the end of the day. So we'll see you at the next event, and thank you again for attending. Bye,
Cool.
everyone.
Thanks, Angelica.